Good morning, everyone. Welcome and welcome back to week 4 of PowerTips Live webinar series that we started a couple of weeks back, 4 weeks. So my name is Jawahar. I'm the innovation lead at Legrand's Data Center Power and Control Division. We have an excellent session today, and to introduce us to the session and the topic today, I have Joel Bryan, the head of global tech support for Legrand Data Center Power and Control, joining us with some really nice background and a lot of video going on in the background, very dynamic. So Joel, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jawahar, and thanks everybody again for joining us for our series. As Jawahar said, I'm the Global Director of Post-Sales Support and Documentation Services here at Legrand for the Raritan and the ServerTech brands. And in today's session, we're going to talk about how to create additional users for new remote users that are working from home or off-site. And walking us through that session, as previous sessions, will be Duncan Gwynn, who is our post-sales support product specialist as part of our technical support organization. And following the walkthrough, as usual, we're going to open up for questions. So we'll unmute everybody and give you a chance to ask questions. However, if you have questions as you see them come up relating to this particular function and feature, feel free to type them in advance. And for other issues that are outside the scope of this, it's always best to email us at tech@raritan.com. Or if you want to talk to a person, to a product support specialist, give us a call at our 800 number and we will get right back to you, or take your call and try to resolve your problems then and there. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Duncan, and Duncan is going to take us through this walkthrough session. Duncan, it's on you now.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Jawahar. So today's session, we're talking about adding users. Some of you, depending on your location, you may be back in the data center or office by now, but some of you may still be working remote. So this will definitely be a beneficial session. Obviously, there's a lot of organizations that may share the default admin account. But in terms of having a nice audit trail to see, what kind of changes were made or what kind of power actions were sent to the PDU, it's nice to have, user accounts made up so you can see who did what. So as usual, we're going to start at our login page, and we're going to log in as the admin user so we can make changes. And this takes us, of course, to our PDU dashboard. So on the left-hand side, we have our menu, and then we have a sub-menu called User Management. So we're going to click on that to get into the User Management menu. And that takes us directly to the users page. So you can see our default admin account here. We don't have any other users added at this point, but before we do that, I want to talk about roles. So every user has to have a role, and this will of course determine what kind of privileges that user has on the PDU. So by default, there is an admin role that is locked. It cannot be changed. And then it also comes with a predefined operator role. So we look at this operator role, you can see that we have some boxes checked, some not. So you can tailor this to exactly what you need. Most of this is, they can acknowledge alarms, switch outlets, change their own password, and change some device configuration, but they can't change network settings or SNMP settings or anything like that. So, there's quite a few options here, and you could, tailor these to your needs. But, again, every user has to have a role. So, you can have several roles to segment the use of the PDU however you feel best. So, the other menu options here we'll touch on in a minute, but let's look at adding a user. So go back into our users menu, we have this little add icon, and we can add new user, and then we have to of course add a password. So we'll create a generic password for this user. You can input other details like name, email address, and contact info if needed, but it's not required. And then we do need to enable the user. So, you can enable and disable users however you wish, but if you want it to be functional, obviously it needs to be enabled. So with that box checked, another box that we can check here is force password change. So, we've given just a default, dummy password of Raritan to this user. So the next time they log in, they will be forced to change it to a new password that's different from the last. So SSH public keys, if you guys are using SSH keys, you can obviously put in a public key here and have that set up. SNMP v3. So if you're using SNMP v3 on the PDU, you might even just have an SNMP v3 user that has this set up. But this is where you add in all those parameters. So your authentication password, privacy password, and then you can change the protocols down here with these drop-down menus. So we won't touch on that right now, but pretty straightforward setup there. The preferences. So in terms of reading like peripheral sensor units, you can modify these to your personal preferences. And then the last section here would be, of course, selecting a role for the user. So I want this user to be an operator. I can then save that. And now this user is created and ready to be used. When that user logs in, they're going to be prompted to change their password. But if they want to go change their password, after they've changed it for the first time, you can select this change password menu and change your password here. If they want to change their user preferences, they can do that in this menu here. So this would be the user preferences for the admin user that I'm logged in as. And then lastly, there is a default preferences for the PDU. So there's a note down here. This applies to any users that are authenticated via remote authentication using LDAP or Radius. And then also, there's sensor reports that can be sent out, and those use the default preferences as well. So that's pretty much it for adding a user, and it's pretty straightforward. The biggest thing is going to be setting up this role with the appropriate privileges. So since we've gone over that, let's go take a look at remote authentication. Some of you may want to use LDAP or Radius for authentication and have a user database that you're referencing to have your users log in. So if we go device settings, security, authentication, you'll see, we've got an authentication type up here right now. It's just set to local. So I can select either LDAP or Radius, based on my infrastructure and what I want to use. And then there's a checkbox here. If if I want to use local authentication, if the remote authentication server is not available. So if I lose connection between the PDU and that server, do I want it to revert back to local authentication? Now, the admin account will always be available for local authentication, but the other user accounts will not be available when you're using remote authentication. So that new user account that I just made, with this saved, I would not be able to log in with them. It would always be checking that user against the LDAP server. So we're not going to dive into the LDAP and Radius setup because that can vary depending on the infrastructure. But we do have some great help documentation for some of the most basic setups. So Microsoft AD, or if you're using Radius, Microsoft MPS, Network Policy Server. So you can go through those and give you a little step-by-step guide. But it's pretty straightforward. All your parameters are in the menu here. Microsoft AD versus Open LDAP. Menu options change slightly, but the big thing is you can test a connection down here. After you have all your parameters in, you can test your connection against the LDAP server, and it's gonna give you step-by-step of what's succeeded, what's failed, so you can see what the issues are. And the biggest thing that we see is this last parameter here. So user has known roles assigned. So the one right before it is users has roles assigned. So that's coming from the server itself. So when you have created your user on the LDAP server and he's a member of pxadmin, it's going to return that group name to the PDU and see if it matches a group on the PDU called pxadmin. And if I did not have a group set up, it would say failed. So we had a case come in just this morning for that very thing. So it's a commonly overlooked setting. So if we go back to our user management in roles, you'll see pxadmin here. So it's case sensitive. So I've given this pxadmin administrator privileges. If I delete that and then go try and test my LDAP server settings again, I can actually just click test connection there, but so I'll type in Duncan. So that last one fails. So again, commonly overlooked, but that's kind of the final step to setting up remote authentication, is having the appropriate group name. In the case of using Radius, that uses filter ID attribute, but for LDAP, we're looking at if that member is a member of a certain group. So that is all set up there. And if you have, local users set up, or now you've set up remote authentication on this PDU, and you again want to roll those changes out to, all the PDUs in your data center, that can be done via the bulk configuration template that we talked about last week. So if we look in maintenance, bulk configuration, I've still got the one that we created last week, but let's look at the built-in profile. And then for local users and roles and things that we set up in that user management menu, we can go down here and look in the user management settings. So they're included in this built-in bulk configuration profile. So you can see users, roles, user preferences, and then the default preferences as well. So those are selected. So any users that we add to this PDU, that data will be put into the bulk configuration profile. And if you're using a encrypted file, obviously you won't be able to see it. If you are using clear text, you'll be able to see the username, but the password will be hashed. So that won't be clear text, which is good. If you want to include your remote authentication settings, so that's under the security sections, security settings. And then we go to authentication settings. And then we have, independent selections for LDAP settings versus Radius settings. So both are included on this template. So with those selected, those will also be included. And we can, I'm not going to save it, I didn't make any changes, but then you, of course, download the template, and then you can push that out to your PDU over, if you want to use USB stick method, you can do that. You can use SCP to push it to PDUs, or if you're a PowerIQ user, you can of course push those bulk configuration templates out through PowerIQ. So that is it's pretty much it for adding users. And then of course we talked about remote authentication as well, using an external user database of some kind. So I think at this point we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions, and I will turn it back over to Joel.
All right, great. Thank you, Duncan. And let's see if we have, so, the first question that I have, Duncan, is how does PowerIQ or management application play a role into remote users?
So if you're a PowerIQ user, you're likely using PowerIQ as kind of, single pane of glass, where you're managing changes through PowerIQ. You're, turning outlets on and off through PowerIQ. So you may be getting into the web UI of the PDU seldomly. However, if you are maybe using remote authentication on the PowerIQ side and logging in with LDAP credentials into PowerIQ, if you wanted to use the single sign-on feature that PowerIQ offers, that would allow you to launch into the PDU web UI, you have to make sure that you have the same remote authentication settings on the PDU as you do in PowerIQ, so that those credentials transfer over to the PDU. But I would say for the most part, anyone that is using PowerIQ, again, it's kind of a single pane of glass. They're going to be getting into the web UI very seldomly because they're making all the changes from that management interface.
Okay. All right. Great. Great. So now I'm going to unmute everybody, and if you have a question, please feel free to ask. And I'd ask that you check your local device settings just to make sure you are indeed unmuted as well. And Javi, did we have any questions come in?
Jawahar, I think you're muted.
Yeah, Javi, you might be muted.
As I was.
Okay.
So I think the question relates to Active Directory setup on both the PDUs and the PowerIQ. So if I were to rephrase the question, why would I or should I set up Active Directory on both the PDUs and PowerIQ for any reason?
Yeah, so we talked about that single sign-on feature. So, let me go into PowerIQ real quick to kind of show this. But, if you want to use the single sign-on where you're able to actually launch into the web UI of a PDU, you need to have that set up. You need to have remote authentication set up on both sides. So I don't believe that I have this particular PowerIQ instance set up for that. But if we look at facility items, for instance, and if I just pick this PDU is the one that we're on currently, and I check that, I can click launch, and it's automatically going to try single sign-on. So, in this case, my credentials match up. So, when it attempted single sign-on, it automatically signed me into the PDU. Now, if I was using my LDAP credentials and I didn't have it set up on the PDU, it's going to fail because obviously the PDU doesn't know that user. They don't, the credentials don't authenticate. So, yeah, if you're using single sign-on, that's really about it. But otherwise, you can, just log in as the default admin user or another local user on the PDU itself.
Yeah, and yeah, I would say generally, if you have PowerIQ, single sign-on has been sort of the typical way that most customers will use it with their users.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that brings up a question on my own end. What happens? I mean, we have this password expiration function within the PDUs, but if the PDU is under PowerIQ control, what's the best way to update those passwords as they expire? Do we have like do we have a way to do it from PowerIQ, or do we recommend any or do we need to log in?
That's a good, thanks for mentioning that, Jawahar, because I forgot to talk about password policy. But if we go into the device settings and go into security, we do have a password policy here, and we have an aging interval. So that's the the timeout that you're referring to, where this password expires in 60 days. And then you can also enable strong passwords here as well, and choose all the parameters that you want. And that applies to local accounts. So if you are using the local accounts in the PDU and you want to push a change out to the PDUs, change your admin password, that could be done through the PowerIQ bulk configuration activities. We can go in and manage our bulk configuration templates, add a new one here. And right here, password update. So this is going to update the password of the account that you've managed the PDU with in PowerIQ. So in most cases, it's going to be some kind of service account or the admin account of the PDU. So I would punch in the old password here and then punch in my new password, and then that would push those changes to all the PDUs that I select. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Nope.
So this
Okay.
is again only for the account that manages the PDU, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
Okay, so for other accounts, you still need to log in directly to the PDUs to
For
do it.
other
So
accounts, technically what you could do is you could log into a PDU. You could make the changes on the PDU. Say you've got 5 local accounts. So you change the password on all those local accounts, and then you could download that bulk configuration template and push it out. So, instead of just changing the one account, you can change all of them by pushing out those bulk configuration templates. But it's important to note that, if you change the default admin password, at that point, you need to update it in PowerIQ as well, because now it's going to have a mismatch. So whereas if you change the admin, or I shouldn't say the admin, but the account that you're managing the PDU with in PowerIQ, if you push it through here, it updates in both places. So, that's one thing to consider.
So there is one follow-up question on the bulk config. So if you do not have PowerIQ, what is the recommended way to push out a bulk configuration?
I would say that's really user preference. If you are trying to do this remotely, probably the easiest is to do it through like SCP, secure copy, and push it through that way. And we have instructions on how to do that in the help guide. But we also have a REST API that could be scripted to do as well. So it depends on your skill level and basically how much work you want to put into it. But if you want to create your own tooling that is tailored to your organization and your needs, you can use the API. If you just want to use something simple in command line, you can do SCP.
So the recommended way, if I were to summarize the different ideas that you mentioned, you would have a limited number of users at the PDU level. You don't want just one, you want more than one, but not too many, because then managing them becomes an issue at the PDU level if you have many PDUs. So you have more than one user at the PDU level, then you have everything pointing to Active Directory for other users. And if you have PowerIQ, you have that pointing to Active Directory as well. It may seem like a lot of work in the beginning, but it looks like it's well worth it because you don't need to. So if you have strict password expiration rules and such, you don't need to go back into the PDUs to do it every single time. You can do, it's taken care by your Active Directory.
Yeah. I mean, there's whoever's managing the infrastructure in the Active Directory. I mean, typically they're going to have a password aging policy, and you're going to update it in one place for multiple functions, if you will. So it's going to update PowerIQ, PDUs, anything that you log in using your AD logins. Yeah, we'll have that updated password. So it is worth it. And again, it all comes back to kind of audit trail. If you have many employees using that default login to make changes on things, you're not really going to know who made what changes, and if they were even authorized to do so. I mean, obviously if they have the login, they were authorized to an extent, but you can have a much more detailed log of any changes that were made or actions that were performed.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Duncan. Thanks, Jalmar. Do we have any additional questions?
At this point, I don't see any additional questions. I hope everybody is able to unmute and speak. If not, please type it on chat so we can double check.
All right. So Javi, what's up with your new setup? This is different than what we've done in the past. You got fancy on me.
You're the one with the video, Joel.
Not as dynamic as yours with rolling video behind you. So, well, I mean, this series has been very successful. We've had a great reception. A lot of people join, and the turnout has been excellent, and we're very thrilled. So we also wanted to figure out how do we how can we do more. And one of the things that we thought about was, at Legrand we've done a lot of field work where we've solved some creative problems with our solutions, or a combination of our products, um, mostly out of the box thinking. And we thought it may be a good idea to share those stories with customers. And so as a result, we thought maybe we should start a series to do just that. So Tuesdays, we're going to start that series, and it's starting next Tuesday. Please stay tuned for the details. They're all being worked out as we speak. And again, we're trying this out as nimble as we can and quickly as we can. So for that, we just want to show some visuals, and the idea is for that to be more conversational and chat based than a live demo like we are doing here, because those are use cases of what we have seen in the field as challenges and how we solve them. So that's why we're trying some screens and video feeds, and so my equipment is kind of growing here. I have multiple computers and such. So that's where we're up to.
Oh, okay, I understand. Is it geared towards this audience that we have here as well?
Absolutely. We have, and the difference, the main difference, in my opinion, is that it's going to be wider than the PDUs, right? So right now we're talking mostly about power strips, but the content for the Tuesday series is going to be all data center power and control, which includes our Starline and data connectivity products as well.
Okay. Oh, very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
So hope to see you all there as well.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. Hopefully you gained some additional knowledge on your Raritan PDUs, and hopefully this was helpful to you, and maybe some things that you could share with your team. Thanks, Duncan. Thanks, Jawahar. And we'll hopefully see you again next week, same time for another session. Thank you, and have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.